Have you ever thought about starting a business and not sure how to make the least amount of mistakes, end up with the most profit, and deliver the most value? Or have you ever been in a business and thought, you know what, I don't know if this really represents who I want to be moving forward, and I want to sell it? Well, look, there's something out there called venture capital, and this is where most of the snakes live. That's what they call them, because there's a lot of people that are Wall Street bros, and they're out there looking to extract value, not necessarily add it. And these middlemen are what people think they have to deal with. And often it's a win-lose scenario where people are trying to take from each other rather than collaborate. And ultimately, the customers get hurt and the vision is limited of where it could be one that is very charitable in nature and profitable at the same time. So I met someone years ago because I had a really good friend say, hey, this is the person you need to meet. Then we were at an event together, Joe Polish's Genius Network. We connected, and then we got referred to each other again. And he flew in, and now we have him up here teaching you about how to navigate this world that it's hard to get the advice you're about to hear. I just drove here for an hour, and it's probably the most concentrated hour of knowledge I've had in years. I mean, I just learned so much I didn't know, I didn't understand, and I didn't recognize. And so I'm excited to have Rob Follows with me here. So
well, it's an honor to be here, Garrett.
Yeah.
It's an absolute honor to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for making the trip in, and for all that you do out there. I mean, it's interesting because our first conversation, you were talking about philanthropy, which is not usually a conversation people have with venture capital.
Right. Well, first of all, I want to thank you for having me here, and I want to thank those that are listening for focusing for a bit on a new way of thinking about when you create a business. Ultimately, we're all going to end up selling businesses that we have, whether somebody sells it after we've died or whether we choose along the way to sell it. We're going to exit our businesses at some point. And so when we start a business, thinking about eventually, which is something I learned over the decades, I didn't realize when I was in my 20s and running businesses, that thinking about the exit, Garrett, right from the very beginning, what am I building this for? Who will this be of value to? And not, as you say, the private equity VCs, financial buyers that try to buy low to sell high and take advantage of entrepreneurs and families. But ultimately, who would really value this business, and why would they value it? And ultimately, what will that support in your life? Because I think that many sell businesses and don't think about necessarily how those funds and that freedom can enable their lives to help themselves grow into the beauty they can be and help make our world a better place. So rather the business being seen as a negative force, which many people look at it as, it can be seen as a fantastic, business for good, where you can build a business up and understand the value of it to strategic rather than middlemen financial buyers, build towards that and sell it when you've got good advice and knowledge on how to do that for 200 or 300% of what a financial person might buy, and be able to live your next chapter of your life and maybe contribute to making the world a better place at the same time with that extra capital.
Well, in June of 1998, I started a rudimentary version of a business that I sold in 2021. And I never expected to sell it. I thought, this is something that represents who I am. It's what I want to do for the rest of my life. What I found is, in some ways that was true, and in other ways it wasn't. I got to a place where I was like, well, this is more of a business than I don't know if I'd call myself an artist exactly, but I like to do comedy. I like to entertain and educate at the same time. And I like to, write. And so what I found was I didn't want to be in operations and management and hiring. And I didn't want to deal with the numbers and looking at margins and all those factors. And so that was part of it. And it would have been helpful to have known you, or even get the education I got recently from when I first met you, because you have this whole process that just absolutely nailed it, which is the 6 Ds, like just understanding why are people selling. Let's talk about why people sell. And even we were talking to my son today, and I was like, yeah, a lot of times people, they sell and someone says, oh, you get the best business. I love what you do. This is great. And as soon as that person flips the switch in their head that I'm going to sell, they're like, why is this? And they like the tone changes. And I had this event called the Advanced Roundtable I do a couple times a year, and 9 out of 10 people that attended had sold a business. And those people all had terrible stories to talk about in the sale of their business with this process. So
well,
they didn't know you.
Well, thank you for the compliment. But where my passion comes from this is I sold my business that I built up. I didn't get into my dad's business. He threw me out of the family financially when I was 18, which is the best gift he could have given me, because I became an entrepreneur that had to pay the bills, and working through paying for school and paying for life as it unfolded. I was an entrepreneur building a business up, and in building that business up, I ended up selling it for 27 times EBITDA, which was absolutely fantastic when I was 29 years old.
Anyone's probably salivating over.
Right.
And just for our listeners that don't know what EBITDA is, it's
Right.
earnings before interest, taxes, and depreciation, essentially. And it's a critical number when you look at what a multiple is for selling a business, and a multiple is whatever times that number is the purchase price. And
Right.
so a lot of people use that as kind of what are the numbers you're really looking at? Because a lot of people talk about revenue as a way to brag, but revenue doesn't mean a whole lot. If it's your total amount that comes in and it costs you more than that to produce it, that's
Right.
not very meaningful.
Right.
So it's almost like bragging rights, where EBITDA gives you a little bit more accurate depiction of what's going on with the business. You might want to say more about that.
Well, I want to go back to your first question on financial versus strategic buyers. So to simplify the industry out there and just boil it down so we could imagine it on one page, Garnet, it would be sellers of businesses, which 75% of, even in the United States, 98% of in Asia, are privately owned businesses. Those businesses are really what Wall Street and in the US, Bay Street in Canada, the City of London in England, are looking for as these financial guys that are supposed to be experts who are looking to buy low to sell high. And who are they selling to? The people that are going to really pay the value, which are strategic buyers, which are in the industry, which are running businesses, where the integrated value of that business makes more for them. And one of the operative questions is, who can make $1 billion owning your business? That's a creative way to think about,
Right.
How do you integrate a business?
Takes the lid off. It expands the vision. I love that question.
Yeah. And if it's intellectual property, who's got the platform to take it to the world? If it's a product, who can create distribution channels, plug them straight in and be able to make a massive profit so they can pay you a lot more as the seller. Rather than selling 80% of your business to private equity or another VC or financial buyer, you too can sell all the way straight through, skip over them to the strategics. So we're delineating the marketplace between financial buyers who are using other people's money, normally very smart, well-educated people that really have a motive to buy low to sell high. Mm-hmm. And then who are the strategic buyers they're going to resell to. And then if we can eliminate those middlemen who are looking for death, disease, divorce, disability, disenchantment, disintermediation.
Those are the Ds.
They're looking for an ability.
Distress, essentially.
Yes.
What's a situation where someone's like, you could prey on it almost,
yes,
right? Or
like ambulance chasing. They're trying to buy low in order to sell high. The big message I want all entrepreneurs and families to hear is you too can sell to strategics. You too can sell to strategic buyers. You don't need to sell to middleman financial buyer. All you need is good representation.
Well, that's a simple and elegant concept that has a profound effect.
It does. You can double or triple what financial buyers will pay by going to strategic buyers. Hence the selling to strategics. You too can sell to a strategic. Now, what does it take? It takes global relationships, because you want to bring in international strategic buyers. They then pay for the marketplace if they're coming into the United States or whatever country it is, plus the value of the business to them, which can be a lot higher. I'll talk about the Rembrandts in the attic analogy in a minute. Mm-hmm. Then you might, they can make a lot more owning the business than you can. It's that simple.
Right. So let's go through some of those Ds.
Sure.
Are there some that are more common than others and some that are more destructive than others?
Yeah. So divorce is a big one. People go through divorce and feel that, they've got to make the payout, just as in death. In some countries, the taxes are quite considerable on death. There's a big liability there, and they're looking for liquidity. Mm-hmm. In those circumstances, you've emotionally gone through divorce, or your family's just suffered a death, or we're dealing with
You're not at your highest confidence moment in those times.
I've been introduced to a widow who we sold a business for 56 times EBITDA, and they were told by their advisors, who were the lawyers they were working with, that it was worth nothing. It's just horrific stories you see out there. So in death, people are mourning. In divorce, they're going through their emotions. It's not the time to be selling a business. You want to be selling a business when it's on the way up a curve, so that the buyer can see the future positive growth in the business and will pay for that. And can I describe the Rembrandt in the attic analogy?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Imagine if your spouse came home and said, and whoever's listening, your spouse came home and said, I want to buy the house over on Main Street and it's $5 million. And your response is, that's great, but aren't they averaging $3 million on that street? And the response is yes, but the kitchen's fabulous and the living room's fabulous. It's got a stone fireplace. I just absolutely love it. And we've got to buy it. So you hesitantly go check it out and ask the realtor, like, is this really that much more expensive? And he says, yes, but there's one thing that I'm kind of thinking might help. Christie's is on their way over, and we found some paintings in the attic that are signed something that starts with an R that ends with a T that we think might be a French name. And you're thinking, do you think that could be a Rembrandt? And the Christie's guys get there, they go up into the attic, and they're like, there's 10 of them here. And you go back down and say to the real estate agent, listen, if everything in the attic comes with it, I'm taking the house, right? And so the question is, what is it that's in your business? Intellectual property, products, distribution, methodologies, geographic location, whatever it might be, management, style, and skill that a buyer would see as a Rembrandt for them that you're not recognizing that it's in your attic. And we see a lot of that. And what private equity does is go and find that and not pay for it. What we want to do, and others that are really sincere about helping you sell to strategics, is understand what those are, uncover them, and present them to a strategic buyer so they're going to pay a percentage of what they make with that, as opposed to just, even an EBITDA multiple.
So it comes down to these people are looking for distressed situations.
Financial buyers.
Yeah. They're the middlemen
Yes.
that are then trying to pump that business up so they could sell it for a whole lot more.
Yes.
Take the value and move on.
Can I elaborate on that?
Please do. I would love for you to.
There's some less than pleasant things that happen during
this
that
is
process.
where they get the name snakes.
Yes. Yeah. And worse, because what they're not being honest. I mean, if they were honest about, and some of them are, but very few, to say that, look, so this would be the approach. This is the approach. Your business is fantastic. We have a potential buyer. We know that this buyer is going to create a great second bite of your apple. So we're going to build it up. We're going to polish it. We're going to take it. Tell us your dream of where it can go. We're going to do all of that. And then we're going to find these, and they have a list of them, potential strategic buyers, these big corporates that you don't know how to approach and you're afraid to approach. We're already talking to them. They're going to be ready in 3 to 5 years. And you just need to continue on your path of the business. And as long as you meet these goals along this graph, which looks like a hockey stick, we're going to pay you all this extra money. And by the way, when you get to the end of this sale in 3 to 5 years, you're going to get the 20% that's left, could be as much as the 80% we're paying you up front. That's the story, okay?
Heard that story. Mm-hmm.
And it's a great pitch for the people that are buying.
Second apple.
But for the seller, my gosh, the question is really, Garnet, why wouldn't you keep your whole apple? I mean, think about that. What are they going to do? They're going to leverage it up with debt because then their equity slice is worth that much more. And I can explain that if you want, but it doesn't matter. The point is that you as the entrepreneur, your business is getting loaded with debt. You're having to carry that load and meet all the obligations due for your earn out, because mostly it's a risk reward thing. The amount of money they pay you up front is not at risk, but if they can actually get you to take it as an earn out and get paid later, their risk reduces, yours goes way up. They should be paying you a lot more for that, and they don't, because you're normally not educated, because what they do is lock you up, Garnet, when they come to make that purchase. They're locking you up saying you've got 60 days to get this done. And then, as you said earlier, they find all kinds of problems to drive the price down. They'll say, we'll pay you later. And remember, they're using other people's money. 20 cents of every dollar they don't pay you goes in their pocket on the 2 and 20 rule, on the way that
explain that a little bit more.
Sure. So a private equity firm has general partners and limited partners. Limited partners are the ones that put the cash in generally, and the majority of the cash. Those limited partners, so imagine you're an investor, usually have an 8% hurdle rate. That is to say, you get the first 8%, and then you get 80% of everything over that. And the guy that was the private equity firm that had you invest gets 20% of that. That means after they've made 8% back, which is not hard to make, the private equity group gets 20 cents on every dollar that they make. And you make them two ways, not paying them out on the purchase price or selling it for a higher number on the far end. And so that 2 and 20 model conflicts. There's a huge amount of conflicts here.
Okay.
First of all, when they buy the business, they want to buy it as low as possible. Why? Well, they're actually making 20 cents on every dollar they don't pay, vis-a-vis the exit price, right? Because that's the 2 and 20 model that their investors are investing in, if that makes sense.
And then they can put debt in there that would.
Well, they put the debt on, because if they put, say, $10 or $10 million in as the equity, if you then leverage up the debt to, say, 4 times the current EBITDA, you talked about EBITDA earlier, that a bank will offer, then that $10 million is actually buying a $50 million business, if that makes sense, not a $10 million business.
Right. So
that's how they leverage it up with the debt.
Right. So they're getting 20% a higher number on that.
Oh, absolutely.
And when they're taking on debt, what are they? When they're taking on debt, they're investing in infrastructure. What are they doing?
Well, it depends on the business, but what they're doing is supporting you. You could support yourself with this, but because you can go borrow the money yourself anyway.
But they're telling a story. You're going to make so much more money because of their expertise.
Yes, and that is, there are positively.
And there is fraud that happens in that often. I have clients that have got involved and they start buying multiple locations and looking like the numbers are great, but they're not real numbers. They're kind of inflated.
Well, I would say, first of all, that 10% of the people I've met in private equity really are honorable. I mean, there are some of them out there that actually come in and support providing growth capital, and providing strategic resources and getting in there and helping grow.
But 10%, that's pretty low.
It is low. In many cases, some of the groups that we end up interfacing with try everything they can not to make that final payment. They load the business up and they pull resources out of it.
Yeah, I have a client that gets hit up all the time by private equity because it's a SaaS business. It's got a high valuation, and I just keep telling them, they're not telling you the whole story.
Well, let's look at the positive side of it. So the negative is trying to avoid selling low to a financial middleman who's later going to sell to a strategic. But if we flip that and look at the positive side, which is my nature to look at the positive side, you too can sell to strategics. So if you actually think about working with somebody like us at STS Capital Partners, or somebody else that might be a competitor doing the same as us, there's not many, but I'm sure they're out there, who sincerely is going to take you to the strategic buyers. And you come to understand who they would be, a whole list of them, like 100 of them around the world, maybe 200 of them around the world. They're all around the world, the Japanese in their own language, the Middle Eastern groups that want to get off oil and gas dependency, the Nordics that have tons of capital to invest. All around the world, there's investors that the Chinese, for those that are willing to have the Chinese invest, are interested in coming into the U.S. market, for instance, and will pay additional to come into the U.S. market. They'll pay for an industry they understand, and they'll perhaps create a new market for your products with their own world that they're coming from, whichever one of those it might be. So that's an example of strategic buyers that therefore will look, and if it's a good advisor, we'll figure out how much they're going to make owning it and go after a percentage of that. That's how, Garnet, we get to 56 times EBITDA, we were saying earlier, and 60 times EBITDA, and 37 times EBITDA, 22 times EBITDA. Those are real examples of deals where, because the buyer is going to you found the right buyer that's going to make so much more, and you know how to present it to them, how to get the senior people to support it, they're going to pay a big multiple because they're making so much more. It's strategic to them, Garnet.
Still a middleman.
Well, if you skip the middleman and go to that strategic, then you're going to get those big multiples. The private
because you did 27 times EBITDA.
I did.
But you could have done
100 times. So I'll tell that story. I went to a strategic. I couldn't find anybody to help me, which is why I'm so passionate, and our whole company's passionate about helping others. We have 33 partners that are all very experienced M&A, both buyers and sellers. And we want all of us in our hearts to help entrepreneurs and family business owners sell to those strategics and understand what the real value is to that strategic and negotiate for the entrepreneurs and the families so they get what the real value is, which I didn't. So I actually sold to, I'll say, the Merritt's family out of St. Louis, Missouri. And Bill Merritt, so it became my mentor, fantastic guy, beautiful family. And they paid 27 times EBITDA, which was a fantastic multiple for my business, which was at that point in time in marketing services. They were one of the largest in the world. But when I got on the other side and finally got to look at my own file when I was trying to look at a comparative deal, I realized I left 75% of the authorized money on the table. And our passion is to get that full value. In that case, it was 100 times, whatever that massive number is that you're really worth to a strategic buyer. In this case, it was protecting them from losing their intellectual property at General Motors. That's what drove it for the 1,000 dealerships that we could have supported for them. And that number is what drove the value, not our actual EBITDA, which gives you a perspective on that, the Rembrandt in the attic. What is it
What's
really
the
worth?
Value for them to have that intellectual property protected so they don't have competitors take them out?
Exactly. And you can only find that number out as a third party talking to them once they've fallen in love with the business, which is the art of this, getting the buyers to fall in love with the business, and then give an indicative value that's supported by the money they're going to make, and getting them to actually share that.
You don't bid against yourself is the other thing. You have them start
Yeah. Well, if I could take a second on it, we get them to fall in love with your business. If you're, and are they willing and able to do it, Garn? And if they are willing and able to do it, how are they going to integrate that business? And the way we get them to open the kimono is by telling them and reminding them they don't want to make a mistake. And they're like, well, no, of course we don't want to make a mistake. Well, tell us what you're going to do with that. And they're telling us we're going to do X, Y, Z. We can then see with X, Y, Z what the amount, if they extend it out, of profit they can drive with the integration of that business. And then we negotiate against that gently with them until we get an indicative value out, and then run those against the other strategics, which
competing against each other essentially in a bidding process.
Yes. Yeah. So that the max amount of value comes out. And we honor the buyers too by telling them, look, because they're saying, well, you've got other buyers, why would we put the time into this? And we tell them, look, if this fails for you, we'll find you someone else. You're not wasting your time. And so we work to get it to a place where it is a win-win, even though it's a very high multiple for the seller. The buyer's actually seeing it differently because they've got a much bigger world that they can bring this into.
So the philanthropic side for you, because this is a part of your company. How does that work? Where did that start? You've got a pretty fascinating story on that side.
Well, thank you for asking, because this is why I do the work I do, and many of our partners and our leaders at STS. So STS stands for Success to Significance, which is our first trademark, through selling to strategics. So we've talked about the selling to strategics part, which is where we create great value. The success, we hope that will support entrepreneurs and families on their own personal path from success to significance. And legacy, what are they going to do? Time, treasure, and talent after you sell the business. What inspires from your heart, the future of how you would design your life, which is why I'm writing a book on life planning, because I think that living your life to the fullest is a real calling. When people really take a step back on it, I find that making the world a better place and the philanthropy that will support that is a natural outgrowth from people's hearts when they realize, I don't really need to work anymore after a sale of a large business or a medium-sized business. What am I going to do that's purposeful so that between now and the time
if they don't figure that out, life can be pretty turbulent.
It can be turbulent, and
they can be pretty depressed.
Yeah, it can be. Yes,
it's like they've lost part of their identity.
Yes,
and what's next isn't identified.
Yeah,
because relaxing lasts for a while.
Yes, no, absolutely.
But it's not permanent.
We call it a purpose drop-off. So there's a purpose drop-off cliff with people that are running a business. It's really all the focus of the energy of their life. And so we start with success to significance, actually. What are the outcomes that you would like to see that you're going to focus on to make this transaction really a fantastic one for you, but it supports then what's going to be in the rest of your life. And that is, planning for post-transaction, which often includes significance because you can afford it now.
Got it. So when you say success to significance, success in the business, but now significance in the impact they make in their life.
Yes, and in helping make the world a better place. So our commitment is to create billions, to be a catalyst, to create billions of dollars of new philanthropic capital. Because if we can have the ability to support entrepreneurs and families in selling to strategics, they'll get 200 or 300% more. So to quote Vern Harnish, he'll say 26 to 260% more you can expect from an STS process of selling to strategics. And so that upside.
So really Vern knows this process.
Oh,
and
inside
tells people,
out. Yeah, inside out. And so the selling to strategics creates that extra capital that can become philanthropic capital as people think about planning what are they going to do with the rest of their lives, and what about that purpose instead of it dropping off? What about it inclining, where you can focus on what really is a passion that you can actually create as a legacy before you pass on.
So you've probably seen people that have sold a business, don't have any purpose, aren't doing any philanthropy, versus someone that's really clear, and the distinction between the two.
Absolutely. And I'm in my experience, which I have significant decades of now, I see those that actually get involved in purposeful work after the sale of their business, or some of them go on to their next deal and then do the purposeful work after that, have a much higher richness and enjoyment of life than those that don't. I eventually, and maybe it's what we're attracting, see many people eventually going in a more purposeful direction. I see much more of that now than I did 20 years ago.
So what I'm hearing so far is you've got a business entity people might come and say, hey, you could sell, and this is an amazing business, and these are the middlemen that are the venture capitalists. These are the private equity. These are the Wall Street people that are basically convincing them of that. That feels great for a business owner. It hits the ego and think, man, I've got this great business. I could sell it, be all this money. I take time off. I've been grinding and working so hard. And then that middleman finds the strategics and takes a big cut.
Oh yeah, 80%. Normally 80%. That's a huge cut.
A huge cut.
So my wife always repeats this because she hears us talking about this. If somebody's knocking on your door to buy your business, they're not your friend. They're not your friend because they're doing it for their own. I mean, if you think about it for a second, they're motivated. They're reaching out for their own gain, and their gain is your loss. And so to the extent that you have these, super well-educated, Harvard graduates, I mean, I'm an Oxford graduate, but I'm not doing that kind of work. And they're saying they want to buy your business because they've got this roll-up they're doing or this view of the marketplace, and they're going to take you somewhere that you can't get yourself. I'm here to tell you that's not true. You too can sell to a strategic. You just need the advice and support of somebody that'll take you through that process and will honor the maximization of your value. And you want to have a fee structure, by the way, in place that is gonna motivate that whole team to support the running up the hockey stick. And when I first got in the business, by the way, Garnet, used to be a declining fee for a larger deal and more success. And now over this course of this last 30 years, it's an inclining hockey stick curve and that's really prudent to have an alignment with the firm that's doing the work for you. So the whole team's trying to work really hard to maximize value. So they're earning a greater fee. And rather than think I'm paying more, you're actually sharing the upside. And that's a great alignment of interests as well.
Right. And so a big reason people look to sell are those 6 Ds that you talked about. But where does the philanthropy conversation and purpose conversation enter when someone engages with you?
That's a great question. Thank you. At the very beginning. And so for anybody that I don't recommend trying to sell your business on your own, but if you were to do that, you would start not with deal dynamics. And in teaching M&A, we teach that you need to start with owner's outcome, with stakeholders' outcomes. So you look at all the stakeholders. There's yourself as the shareholders, your leadership team, there's your clients, there's all of your employees. Maybe there's your community. What are the stakeholder outcomes that you'd want that are required versus preferred? That's where you start. And as part of that, you eventually get to in the required outcome, what is this transaction supporting in my life? And that's the right priority, your life supported by your business. And so ultimately, at the very beginning, we get to that question of, and for us, it's also important to know that the client's really serious about wanting to sell, because if we can build a picture, create a picture of what the vision is post-transaction, and the transaction is going to support that, those bumps in the road along the way are a lot more manageable. And so the discussion of philanthropy and purpose and legacy, Garnet, starts right at the beginning when you're outlining your required versus your preferred outcomes. Required are, if the buyer doesn't support all these outcomes, or the transaction doesn't, I'm not going to do it. And then the additional icing on the cake are the preferred outcomes. By the way, if a client can't articulate those, we know they're not ready to go to market.
If they can't.
Right.
Right. If
people don't know the outcome they're looking for in a transaction, and what a strategic transaction in your own life is going to be strategic and supporting, then there's an emotional, usually, hook to the business that really underneath, subconsciously, the owner wants to stay in the business. And we will encourage them to do that until they get to the point where they really are ready to sell.
Got it. So a lot of people are in a distressed situation when they get there. Others are persuaded because someone pumps up the ego and extracts a lot of value.
Right. For themselves, right?
10% of the time, it's a much better situation.
Yeah.
Because in those inflection moments, those pivotal moments, if the mind switches to like, I'm done, it's hard to go back.
That's true.
Right. And so that puts people in a really fragile state.
Right. Which suggests
decision making.
Yes, exactly.
And it's like, I'm done.
Well, this is a really important point you're raising, Garnet. So pardon me. The suggestion is to start 2 or 3 years before you'd ever even think about it. When you have the energy, you've got the time and you've not run out of gas in terms of, your patience for the business and the strategy in developing a future picture and maybe an integrated picture for a strategic buyer. If you get to the point where you're totally disenchanted and you just want to give the business away because, let's say, we see people that become spiritually awakened and they're thinking, I don't have anything to do with the material world anymore. Actually, pardon me, selling the business for a high value is more prudent than just giving it away. And so my suggestion based on your question is to start earlier than you might otherwise plan. It's never too early to start.
Before you're in the thick of things and in the emotional state of it, and you can start thinking strategically about how to build it. So, I mean, I think that's critical. So as I look at, you have some great materials here, and we've covered some of it, but, this making extraordinary exits possible. What are the key components of making that possible and happening? Like, what are we've talked about part of that.
Yes.
The bidding process, the going straight to strategic, thinking globally, asking the question, who would make this into $1 billion company?
Exactly.
Or get, so like those are all great because I think it just changes a perspective from being one, especially if someone's fatigued in the business and disenchanted in some way. It's hard to think that big.
Right.
Right.
So starting earlier. So to answer your question on what supports making an extraordinary exit possible, starting early and understanding what your required versus preferred outcomes are, and starting to understand what the Rembrandts are in your attic with some professional support for that, starting to identify who all these potential strategic investors are so that you can actually think about growing into the value that they're actually going to see in the business, and expanding your strategies when you're growing the business in the areas that are going to create more value. At the same time, aligning your management and leadership team for the sales so that they all are going to, pay off their house mortgage or buy a second home or whatever it is that's motivational for your leadership team. So there's full alignment, Garner, between your own interests and those of the leadership team, those of the strategic buyers, and those that are actually supporting you along your road to get there. And so that's the key. Those are key components, as well as working with an advisor that has global relationships and and relationships inside the industry and industries outside of yours that are industries close enough to be adjacent so that they can come in and pay a premium to come into your industry. All of those are components that'll help.
It would also seem one of the issues in the model for the traditional method,
right,
is that the attorney's interests are not aligned with the client's. The longer the deal takes, the more fees the attorneys get.
Right.
So where are they in this model?
Well, so the first of all, in selling to a strategic, the strategic buyers are experienced at getting deals done, and so they're not as a financial buyer going to stretch out the period of the purchase in order to try to negotiate down and grind effectively, which is one of the strategies of private equity, the seller. They're not interested in doing that. So you're starting.
They want to see the transaction.
Yeah, they'll
happen.
do due diligence in 30 days. They know the industry. They know your business. They understand it. They understand how it's going to fit. There's not a 60, 90-day due diligence period where they're grinding. They're not looking for problems. They're just looking to avoid large liabilities that they could take on.
I just see this as efficiency, elegance, and expansion.
Yeah, that's a great way
Efficiency,
to put it.
elegance, and expansion is kind of the 3 E's that kind of come up as you're teaching this. And a lot of it feels like, without knowing what you're saying, it feels like a black box that we don't understand what's going on inside. Therefore, and it's kind of like, you're writing a book. I've written a lot of books. That feels black box the first time you write. You're like, okay, how does publishing work and distribution and, what like, I didn't know about storage fees. I didn't know about, shipping fees. I didn't know about all the costs of printing. I didn't know about, there's just so many factors that you go through and you're like, oh, that was an unpleasant process. But once you kind of see in that black box is a different process. And I kind of feel like that's what's happening here.
It is, and there's a huge advantage to financial buyers, and private equity has done a brilliant job for themselves of setting themselves up as the known entities in the marketplace that you can sell your business to. And the sellers don't know. They haven't seen this option of selling to strategics, Garner. And so they don't know that these are middlemen that are going to resell. They don't see that as the simple truth that it is because there's nobody out there telling that story. And so it's unfortunate then that people can get drawn into this black box of conflict because the advisors even can be conflicted. If an advisor is working with private equity or with specialized strategic buyers, they're not even going to help the seller maximize value because they're more interested in the buyer than they are the seller, even though you're paying them as the seller. So one of the other keys to an extraordinary exit is working with an advisor that really is true to their word and their agreement, and they're actually supporting the seller. They're not in the pocket of the buyer.
Yeah.
Industry specialists that only work in one industry, say it's plastics, and they're talking to the same 10 plastics buyers, they are more worried about what that plastics buyer is actually going to feel about the transaction. They are that one-time seller because they're going back every month. And yet sellers get talked into it. They're like, I know Joe and Steve and Sue that are all these buyers. And it sounds like that's really impressive. It's actually a conflict because they're more interested, Garnet, than making sure the buyer's happy, and they're going to put it right in the middle of the bell curve of the normal, transactions at industry, so everybody's happy. They're not going to push for maximization of value up the front end of the bell curve.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Rob. Appreciate you, enlightening us and opening up the how this actually works and seeing behind the scenes and you figuring it out so that it's actually, instead of value extraction, it's value creation.
It's an honor. And honoring. It's an honor to do this work, to have built a team as powerful as our STS Capital Partners team. And I'm sure we'll have competitors that come along. But the point is,
that would be good if you do, because it's better for the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Those that will honor the seller.
There's enough businesses going. There's 90% that aren't doing this right.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Exactly. But what I wanted to say is that a win-win outcomes where you're positioned with a strategic buyer, they can make a huge amount more. You can sell for huge multiples, is way better than selling to a financial buyer. And so all I would say as a conclusion, if private equity and other financial buyers are knocking on your door, or you're thinking of selling to them, do yourself a favor and at least interview one advisor that'll take you down the selling to strategics path. And you can compare those and decide what you'd want to do. Make sure there's no conflicts. And the industry specialists I would avoid. Go with somebody that's really going to honor you as the seller, knowing that you too can sell to strategics, have an extraordinary exit, maximize value, and then the success to strategics becomes very real, because then you too can help make the world a better place in any way you choose to. Got the time, treasure, and talent to do it, Garnet. And thank you.
Hey, thanks for watching. I appreciate it. And if you're enjoying these videos, well, there's good news. More where that came from, so go ahead and click through and watch the next video now.